So yes, as Emma said, I'm a co-investigator of the English longitudinal study of aging. I joined the team back in its second wave. So I've been working for this study for a long time and I know it quite well. So today I'll be giving you an overview of ELSA. So I will be starting my presentation by saying what is ELSA, what is the aim of the study and what we've been collecting, but also I will be presenting some recent developments of ELSA, so something new that we've been introducing. And I will conclude my talk with some of the latest research findings using the study. So what is ELSA? It is a multidisciplinary study of a representative sample of people aged 50 and over living in private households in England. So people are re-interviewed every 2 years at regular intervals. We also have introduced refreshment samples to keep the sample representative and also to keep the lower end and the upper end full, because people die, so we tend to have a fewer older people, and as people age we tended to have a fewer younger people. So we've been refreshing the sample, and sometimes we also refresh the whole sample, because it's now 20 years, so some people have moved out of the country, they decided not to participate anymore. So we've been introducing new people. The primary objective of ELSA is to understand the complex dynamics of the aging process. And in particular, we wanted to look at the relationships between economic and family circumstances, health behaviors, social participation, biology, retirement, as well as health and well-being. And this is just a general picture, but ELSA collects much more than that. Findings have been used a lot in policy. So we work in conjunction with policymakers, Department for Work and Pensions, Department for Health, Department for Transports, and they've been really useful in improving the lives of older adults. In this slide, I have a summary of the data collection to date. We started back in 2002, which was what we call the first wave. But in fact, people participating in ELSA had already been interviewed in another survey, which is a cross-sectional health survey. It's called the Health Survey for England. So we do have some information prior the first time that we interview in ELSA, and this information is also available. So to date, we have completed 9 waves of data collection, and the data is available for analysis. And each wave includes a computer-assisted paper interview, which is mainly, yes, it's a computer interview. Then every 4 years, we also have a nurse visit. So we have nurses that go into the respondents' houses and they perform several measurements, from blood samples to height and weight and blood pressure, also lung function and so on. So this is just an overview of the sample size and when was refreshed and from which health survey for England we have refreshed the people. In terms of what we collect, the collection of the data is divided into a main interview, self-completion questionnaire, and then we have the nurse visit. So during the main interview, there are many modules and the interview is quite long. It's about 1 hour and a half. Then that's on average. Some people might take longer and some people might take less than that. But we collect demographic data, income and assets, a lot of information about employment, psychosocial factors, consumption that includes housing and expenditures, expectations, so how long people think they will live or they will work for, or how the financial situation will be in a few years' time. We also collect data on social and civic participations. And then we have physical health. During the interview, we have also an objective measure of physical health, which is walking speed. So people are asked to walk 2.4 meters back and forth, and we time them. We have several health behaviors, measures of mental health, psychological and social well-being, and also a good cognitive function battery, as well as psychosocial factors. During the nurse visit, we measure blood pressure, grip strength, blood samples, including DNA, height and weight and waist. We also had lung function through a spirometer. We also do a battery of balance tests, which have been performed up to wave 6, but due to findings, we had to stop them. And we also collected hair samples for cortisol. Most recently, in ELSA, we've done GWAS, which was conducted on approximately 7,800 participants. Then we ran a quality control on the analytical sample, and we ended up with about 7,200 individuals and over 1 million genotyped SNPs. From this information, we have derived polygenic scores that are available to use for analysis. So these are scores around the personality types, psychopathology, physical health, socioeconomic traits, and so on. There are many actually available and can be accessed through our data. I will talk about how to access the data in a little bit. Now, we are currently carrying out our wave 10, which was supposed to be in 2020, and it couldn't start because of COVID. So we started in autumn 2021. We had a mix of video interviews as well as face-to-face interviews. So people that were not feeling comfortable in having the interviewer at home were offered the video interview. And it was taken up by several people actually. The main innovation of our 10th wave is the sampling of a minority ethnic group sample. So we used a boost sample to introduce minority ethnic groups. So up to wave 9, the representation of minority ethnic group was very small in ELSA, so about 2 or 3%. But as the cohort start coming in, we can see that more ethnic groups are entering this age into the national profile. So we were able to start boosting this sample and introduce ethnic groups. Another innovation is about the questions on COVID. So we introduced the questions on positive tests, hospital stay, long COVID, and also vaccines. Also, we have introduced prescribed medication into the main interview. Previously, they were collected during the nurse visit. But now, because we want to reach as many people as possible, we've moved into the main interview. And lastly, we have introduced a measure of social prescribing, which is going to be quite useful in understanding how social prescribing has been working, especially post-pandemic. We have in general large refreshment sample to rebalance the 50 to 64 age group as well. Another innovation that we introduced in wave 10 is the accelerometry. So we have provided our half of our respondents with a wearable device on the wrist for 7 days. So we'll be collecting information on sleep and also physical activity. Then another important sub-study of ELSA is the Healthy Cognitive Aging project, which is a worldwide initiative to implement harmonized protocol to assess dementia and mild cognitive impairment. It was run the first time on 1,274 adults aged 65 and over. It's the first England-wide dementia study completed and has a very extensive neuropsychology clinical assessment, and is international because in parallel other studies of aging have introduced this study, and we have now obtained funding to carry out the second assessment. So we'll be starting next year with the second assessment on the same people, but we'll also be introducing new people that have turned 65 since. Most importantly, ELSA has a data linkage, so it's been successfully linked to national insurance contributions, to benefits, including state pension and tax credit, to tax records, hospital episode statistics, NHS central register for mortality and cancer. And recently we linked our ELSA participants to air pollution data such as PM2.5 and NO2. ELSA was initially designed to be directly comparable with the US Health and Retirement Study, and since 2002, when ELSA launched, more than 25 countries in the world have initiated such comparable longitudinal studies of aging. So you can see from the map all the longitudinal studies of aging that are comparable to ELSA and to HRS. So this forms really the basis for important cross-national comparison of the dynamic of health, of socioeconomic status, retirement, and these comparisons are nowadays facilitated by a platform called the Gateway to Global Aging Data. So this is a platform that helps people to carry out cross-national comparison, because they have harmonized all these studies, and they provide the codes for variables that will allow people to compare studies across countries. So ELSA is in this project, and I'm also a co-investigator of this project. This platform is extremely useful, and I have done several studies myself, and the information is really well structured and well done. So ELSA also collected in 2020 information about COVID-19. We call it the ELSA COVID-19 sub-study, was developed to understand the experience of the pandemic among older people, and whether and how this affected their health, finances, and social lives. It was funded by the ESRC. The data collection, we had 2 waves of data collection, first in June, July 2020, and then in November, December. And the response rate was extremely high. The majority of people completed it on the internet, which was, excuse me, a surprise to us, because we thought that they would never be able to do it, but the majority opted for this and was quite successful. And only about 18% opted for a telephone interview. So the sample was quite large, about 7,000 in the first wave and just less than 7,000 in the second wave. We collected measures on household characteristics, information on COVID-19, health and health behaviors, employment, financial situation, and social participation and connectivity. So this was a shorter version of the ELSA main interview. We couldn't include everything, and also included new questions, obviously, about the pandemic. How can you access the ELSA data? The ELSA data is free and can be accessed through the UK data service. You only need to register and say what you intend to use the data for, and then you are able to download all the data. There are certain characteristics that are more sensitive, so you might need to apply for a special license, but it's quite straightforward. You will be granted the access. So in this study, we looked at the immediate and longer-term impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on mental health and well-being of older people using the latest COVID-19 sub-study and information collected before. We looked at depression, anxiety, quality of life, and loneliness. And we had a set of covariates to account for differences between people with and without probable COVID-19. So we also accounted for people that had COVID-19 during this time. And what we wanted to look at was whether depression, quality of life, loneliness, and anxiety changed before COVID and during the two waves of the pandemic. So as we can see from these graphs, the prevalence of people with depression increased steeply, as it did the prevalence of people with poor quality of life, and also the prevalence of loneliness. Anxiety was only measured during the COVID-19 sub-study, so we only had 2 assessments, but we could see that between June and July, and November and December, also anxiety increased. Then we used the standardized scores to understand which of the outcomes had deteriorated the most. And we found that when we looked at changes comparing the first wave of COVID in June and July and before, depression was the outcome that deteriorated the most. But it was also the one that deteriorated the most when we looked at changes between November, December, and pre-COVID. And lastly, we also looked at changes between June and July and November and December of the same year, and we found that again, depression deteriorated the most. They all deteriorated, obviously, but depression was the outcome that was the most affected. Lastly, we looked at differences by gender, and we could see that women experienced poor mental health and poorer mental health than men, but also they experience a greater deterioration between compared to before and during COVID. So women are the yellow lines. And we also looked at wealth. So wealth is a measure of socio-economic status in older people. We used 3 groups, the blue being the poorest and the yellow being the richest. And we can see that for all the outcomes, people in the poorest wealth experience worse mental health, loneliness, anxiety, but also they suffered for the worst changes in these outcomes. So that brings me to the end of the presentation. Here there are some useful resources about ELSA, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.